Hey everyone, this is Brian Barczyk from BHB Reptiles and Steak Bites TV. You're listening to the Herp Herpere Show.
It says here we should work in teams. I tend to think of myself as a one-man wolf pack.
You're about to enter Information Overload, a worldwide transmission with Herp Herpere's featured Breeder of the Week. Here's your host, Jason Rossi.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening in on this episode of Herp Herpere. I'm your guest host, Sean Bradley, filling in for Jason Rossi. This is going to be the second episode of 2013, and you can listen to this podcast by way of iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or RossiReptiles.com. This episode is going to be part 2 of a 3-part series that we're doing with me hosting. In this second part, I'm going to be interviewing the person that I think provided the most influence for me to grow into a professional breeder and do this as a career, and that's Brian Barczyk from BHB Enterprises. In last week's episode, I interviewed my understudy. It's Tim Bailey of Bailey & Bailey Reptiles. So if you haven't listened to that show, I really suggest you check it out because Tim's got a lot to share with newcomers that want to really climb the ladder of breeding and keeping reptiles as a semi-professional, hopefully professional hobby or business in the future. So yeah, finally for the third part of the series, I'm going to be collecting various questions from you guys, all the listeners, about the business practices, shipping methods, anything like that. I mentioned it last week on Tim's show too. So please, as you listen to this show with Brian, think of questions you'd like me to answer and email them to me. It's Sean, S-E-A-N, at exoticsbynature.com. Or you can catch up with me on Facebook. It's under my personal name. It's Sean, S-E-A-N, Bradley. And you can message me there. So anyway, without further delay, I'd like to welcome Brian Barczyk to the show. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Sean. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be a part of this.
Great. It's really funny that I first met Brian and his wife Lori when I was about 14 years old at Orlando, at the Orlando show, which is now the Daytona show, and I was barely able to see over his table displays. Lori frequently jokes with me about that. His collection contains a lot of ball pythons, but he has a large number of other species. So I guess after knowing you for 20 years or so and having you influence me so much in so many areas, not just ball pythons, but colubrids and other business things, you started a collection that was pretty serious a while before I met you. So I guess my first question for you is, when did you get interested in the business of breeding reptiles on a professional scale, and how did you start that off, if you could sum it up for us?
Yeah, well, first off, it's like you said, it was, I remember well meeting you in Orlando, and you were always so enthusiastic, and I remember every year you'd come up and buy, a pair of striped corns or something like that for us. So it was always one of the, things that me and Lori looked forward to, and it was awesome to kind of just now become such good friends over the years. But getting on to the business side of things, much like you were when I first met you, I was always really infatuated with reptiles. I mean, ever since I can remember, I've told the story a ton of times where literally my first memory as a human being was when my mom tells me I was 2 years old, was when we visited a local zoo and I saw, believe it or not, a ball python as an exhibit. And it's amazing that is my earliest memory as a person. And so I think I was destined to work with reptiles just because of that, if nothing else. But as my whole life, I was just, into reptiles. Unfortunately, I came from a family that was terrified of reptiles and didn't have any pets, not even a dog. So it was kind of this really miserable experience of being a diehard animal lover that drew pictures of dinosaurs and drew pictures of snakes and watched every TV program on anything back then. And not being able to actually experience it. And years and years and years, I begged my mom to get a snake and to get other animals as pets, even goldfish or anything, just something living that I could care for. And fortunately, I was probably about, right around the age that me and you met, Sean. I was probably between 13 and 14. I started frequenting a local pet shop, and literally, when I mean that, literally every day after school, I would go there and hang out for hours. And finally, I think my mom just realized, and it got to the point where I was such a staple at the shop, I would actually help out for free. They'd have me clean cages and do whatever else for free. And ultimately, I ended up working there later on when I turned 16. But finally, for my 15th birthday, my mom allowed me to get my first snake, and it was a Burmese python, believe it or not, which I still look back on that and think, what the heck, talk about not doing research, and I don't understand how the pet shop could probably have sold a Burmese python as my first pet. But regardless, it was a great animal, and ultimately I ended up getting a ball python and then a boa constrictor, and then ironically enough, just like me meeting you, I met Mark Bell. And Mark Bell used to supply from Reptile Industries or RepMart, and they used to supply the store that I ultimately worked in with their reptiles, captive bred reptiles. And at the time, I didn't know anything about breeding snakes, and I didn't even know that you could breed snakes per se. And I kind of became friends with Mark, and he was here up in Michigan with me, and he was a small-time guy. Just well, back then he was a big guy, but he only had a couple hundred snakes. But back then, a couple hundred snakes was considered enormous.
That was a serious collection then.
Yeah, back then it really was, and so I had the opportunity to go over Mark's house on numerous occasions, and realized, like, hey, this would be really awesome to breed some snakes and maybe make a few extra dollars to help pay my way through college or whatever it is, and that's what happened. Is I bought a few animals from him. I bred a few things, nothing too spectacular, but it certainly could see the potential, and then that's when the really thing that changed, I think, the entire future of the hobby, to be honest with you, happened, and that was when Bob Clark started producing albino Burmese pythons, and Mark was early in on that march of Burmese pythons, and he bought a group of animals, of babies from Bob Clark at a kind of wholesale price, and he was going to sell the majority of them off and keep his 2 pair, 3 pair, whatever he was going to do. And I happened to be the recipient of one of that pair of albino Burmese pythons for $3,000. And again, that was every dollar I had, from paper route to
and that was a ton of money for a snake.
It was not only a ton of money for a snake, but it was also a ton of money for a kid that,
right.
I mean, it's unbelievable that my mom even somehow allowed me to take all of this money that I had saved up for college and spend it on a pair of snakes. What a crazy thing. But I really, have to always go back and respect my mom for allowing me to do that. And sure enough, I continued to grow the rest of my collection, although I had spent most of my money. I was still, again, doing, paper route and working at the pet shop at the time, making enough money to still buy more snakes. And I was a hustler, just like I know you were, growing up in this business too, where I would, buy 10 snow corns from Mark for, $30, and they'd retail for $50, and I would sell 8 of them off for $50 to pay for the 3 that I was keeping, or whatever the case, whatever the numbers worked out. So I was still growing my collection, but then, fortunately, when I was 17, just before I turned 18, I produced my first albino Burmese pythons and made $40,000 that year on albino Burmese pythons and hetero Burmese pythons, and that's really what started it. I thought to myself, and still I was like, I'm going to go to school, and I did. I went to college for a couple years, and by the time I was in my second year of college, I was just making way more money breeding snakes than I could doing what I wanted to do, which was either zoology or microbiology, and I thought to myself, well, this is what I love, and there was just starting to be the kind of, professional breeders, full-time breeders, guys like Eugene Bissett and a few other guys were quitting their jobs and going full-time into snake breeding, and I thought, why not me, and I thought I would give it a roll, and, here we are 25 years later.
Yeah, that's great. That's an outstanding story, and I guess in a lot of ways it bears a lot of similarity to probably a lot of us that are doing this full-time. So I guess, having said that, like you said, you move on from one to another. I mean, how I had 1 snake, then I had 4, and I had 20. Then we had a a third bedroom in the house, and my mom, like your mom, a lot of patience and a lot of, I don't know, I guess trust in what we were doing. And sadly enough, I lied to her. I was telling her, there's 40 snakes in that room, and there was 140 snakes in that room. So I guess, about what size, if you don't mind sharing again, what size is your facility that you guys work in, and about how many adult breeding animals, or let's say static animals in your collection, not necessarily babies, because I know that number can go up and down in the multi-thousands that you could work with. But, I mean, about how many are you talking about over there, not just ball pythons, but, other species as well, colubrids and whatnot?
Yeah. First off, my building is 15,000 square foot. And packed to the hilt. As a matter of fact, I'm really out of space, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do for the next thing, if I'm going to move or if I'm going to expand, or I'm not really sure. Trying not to even think about it at the moment, trying to settle in here. But, as far as the number, it's really difficult. I always use the number, that I have about 30,000 snakes, but like you said, that includes babies, that includes razors, that includes everything. One day I probably should go through and actually, do a count of the adults, because we inventory the babies for sale all the time, but adults really very rarely get inventoried. And, if I were going to guess, I would say we're probably in the neighborhood of, 15 to 17,000 animals that are staying here for their life, whether they're being raised up, they're already adult, they're part of breeding projects, something on that line, somewhere in that number. And then, like I said, depending on the time of the year, we always have anywhere from 10 to 30,000 snakes that are for sale, or in that transit stage. So, that's about the best, kind of estimate to numbers that I could tell you.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of stuff. Obviously, that's a lot of mouths to feed. That's a large infrastructure, employees, rodent supplies. All these things are something that, a lot of us have to worry about as you grow into a larger collection or a larger, breeding operation. Because some of our listeners to this show, I'm sure, are interested in what we do to maintain this full time. As I've stated last week on Tim's show, my collection is about 2,500, 2,800 square feet. So it's a pretty smaller, much smaller professional full-time collection than what you're working with, Brian. But I guess, I've given a lot of people advice on trying to get into this thing. Interviewing Tim last week and talking about growing from a hobbyist into a breeder that hopes to have a significant supplemental income, or maybe even quit their day job to be able to do what we do every day. What advice would you give to a collector or a breeder wanting to further a collection into a larger scale, whether it be from a hobby to business, small business, or from a smaller, supplemental business into something like a full-time, full-blown, job? This is our career. So what advice would you have for people? You can go into detail on this as much as you like, because, a lot of people are going to, really want to know what you have to say.
I think it's first off, I think everybody is going to be completely different. You can have, like you said, you can have a nice business with a couple spare bedrooms. You can have a nice business with a basement full of snakes. You can have a 2,300 or 2,500 square foot building. You could have a 15,000 square foot building, or you can have 10 of those, like Bill Brandt down in Florida. And there's all different levels, and so first you have to ask yourself what you want out of it. Why are you doing it? The one thing I will always preach, and I know, Sean, that I've said this before, is that never breed snakes for money. If money is your reason for breeding snakes, or any animal for that matter, get into something else, for gosh sakes, because the money, although can be good at times, is never worth the amount of stress and headache and hassle and everything else. Now, if you're breeding snakes because you love working with the animals, and there's nothing wrong with making money. I've always said that. There's nothing wrong with making money on animals if that isn't your direct reason for working with animals, if you're not exploiting the animals. And there are people that work with animals that do it specifically for the money, and most of those people, or at least some of those people, certainly take great care of their animals, and I don't have a major issue with what they're doing. But for me, I think that your motivation should be pure, which is, the fact that you're working with animals and you're doing what you love, and if you make money, then that's great. And there is always that saying, do what you love and the money will follow, and I do really believe that wholeheartedly. Once you've established that, like, okay, I love my animals, I want to do this for a living, this is where I want to go, then you have to start deciding a number of other things. What level do you want to do? What commitment level? Because you know as well as I do, and anyone else that's listening that does reptiles for a living knows, these things, we just had Christmas, we just had New Year's. I'm sure you were just like I was. We didn't have days off. I was in here at the shop, all those days that my crew was off on holiday. I was in here working, not only doing my work, but doing their work as well, because I always say, animals don't take a holiday. They don't take a vacation. They're 24/7, 365 days a year.
It seems like 370 days, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like a year. Jesus, why does our year have an extra few days in it? Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, though. I mean, even though, that was an accidental slip-up, I mean, really, it feels like that. Sometimes 30-hour days just aren't enough. But sorry to interrupt you to laugh about that for a second, but it's so true, It
is true. It's like as a snake breeder, you need more hours in the day than there possibly is. And that brings me to my next point before I start talking about, where to go next is one thing that is very, very concerning, or something you have to be concerned with when you want to take it from a hobby that you love your, 5 snakes, 10 snakes, 50 snakes, whatever it is, and you're a hobby, and you want to take it to a profession where this pays your bills, is that you want to make sure you never have the love of the animals or the passion for what you do stolen from you. Because trust me, I always tell people, and they're always surprised when I say this, I say the worst part of my job is making money. I hate making money. I don't like selling snakes. This may come to a surprise for people. I hate selling snakes. It's the worst part of my job. It's not dealing with people, because I like people. I love dealing with my customers and my clients, and I appreciate their support. I hate the actual part of having to bag a snake up and put it in a box and leave my facility. I get attached to all my snakes. I literally have so much sadness every time I send a snake out. It almost takes away from it. So that's where it steals my passion, is stolen from by selling snakes. But fortunately, I'm so uber passionate about snakes and all animals for that matter that I'm willing to push past that, because this is what I want to do for a living. Other things that happen is the stress of making sure your electric bill's paid, making sure your rodents are coming in on the right time and paying that bill and all this other stuff. And a lot of times what I've seen, and I know you've seen it too, Sean, is that you get a guy that's just gung-ho, wants to do this, they get into it, and they start hating it. They start hating everything about it. They hate it. And then next thing you know, they even hate the animals. They don't get the enjoyment out of it. So you have to take all that into account if you want to make that leap into a professional or a breeder as a full-time career. Can you still love what you do? Because if you don't get into it. Do not go down that road. And again, I know some people are going to say, well, how would I know unless I go down that road? Well, you'll know soon enough. If you start going down that road and you start realizing, like, you're not excited about that albino corn snake hatching again. And again, that's one of my sayings, is that the day that I'm not as excited about hatching an albino corn snake as hatching my very first mutation ball python is the day I'll get out of this business. And my crew knows that they see me all the time. During the hatch season, the first thing I do in the morning is go to check what colubrids are hatching. Mm-hmm. What ball pythons are hatching. And I'm jazzed every time I see a little baby normal corn snake head pop up. The thing's worth, $10 or $12. And I'm just as excited as when I'm hatching, a $25,000 or $30,000 ball python.
Well, it's the fruits of your labor. It's the fruits of, it's the fruits of your labor. And the fact is that, as long as you've owned BHB, let's just say, just put a time period on that. Say what? 88, 89, 1988, 1989.
89.
89. Okay, 1989. You haven't worked a day in that many years. Or at least I haven't. In 13 years of having Exotics by Nature, I haven't worked a day. It's every day I've wanted to get up and go in and check stuff. And, when bills are bad or you have to sell snakes to make ends meet or whatever, because you have not only yourself and your family to take care of, but you also have your employees' families in mind as well. So that money comes in, but you're still not working every day. You're not getting up like, my alarm went off at 6:30 and I got to get my coffee, and I got to get my suit on, and I got to go into work, and I got to glad hand the boss, and I got to do. That doesn't happen with us.
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you may put in a lot of hours, but it's not. I will work 100 hours a week before I punch a clock and work for somebody else doing something I hate. My life has been, and that's what I always say is, when you do love it as much as guys like me and you, it isn't, I'm here sometimes till 9, 10 o'clock at night after starting at 8 in the morning, and I don't want to leave a lot of times. I'm at my shop and I'm like hanging out, and it's like I don't even want to go home. Not that I don't love my home and my family, because certainly I do, but it's just this is what I love. This is where I want to be. This is everything about it. So as a once you get to that point where you realize, hey, I'm not going to lose the passion for the animals to do it, then it's just a decision on how big you want to go. I mean, how much do you want this to control your life? Do you want one employee? Do you want 10 employees? Do you want, 100 animals to care for? Do you want 1,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 animals to care for? And once you've decided all of those factors, and those are all really specific, I probably get asked that more than anything. It's like, what advice would you give me? I want to start a business. And I always say, well, your individual, it's completely different for every single person. I can't really give you advice because I've only done it one way. I mean, I can give you advice on what I think you should do if you tell me a bunch of things like how big you want to be, how much time, how much money, how much effort, so on and so forth. But that's a really individual question that can only be answered by that particular person. But still, always keep in mind, in my opinion, is go as big as you want to go and still love what you do. And if you start to not love it, then get to a point where you do love it, because it's not worth it, It's not worth it for the animals. It's not worth it for the hassle. It's not worth it for anything if you're just doing it to try to make it $1 million. Because, me and you, gosh, Sean, we could sit here and talk for hours about how many guys, guys like Joe Capone come to mind that, we're going to come in and make $1 million in this business, and they were a flash in the pan. They threw a bunch of money in, they burnt out, they got a bad reputation, whatever the case is, and then they were gone. And there's a million Joe Capones out there in the last 25 years that I've known, and I hate to say it, but I look at a lot of guys that are coming into the business and really making a splash, and sometimes I look and I go, I wonder if this guy's going to be around 5 years from now, and I'm always wondering, is this one of the guys that's going to make it? Is he going to be a mainstay? Is he going to be an exotics by nature? Is he going to be a Reptile Industries, or is he going to be a Joe Capone? And in that process, the only thing I can really hope is no matter which direction he goes, that it's not the animals that are going to suffer. And we both know that happens on occasion too.
Right. Well, they don't produce what somebody thought they would. They don't. I mean, it comes to mind, somebody, again, I'm not really going to mention a name on it, but somebody that bought a pinstripe from me for $20,000 the year after, or 2 years, I guess, 2 seasons after I bought one from you, when the price had come from $25,000 down to $20,000. This guy bought this snake thinking, I'm going to make all this money with it and everything else. And I see this guy at a show a couple years ago, and pinstripes are $250 at $350 at the time. And he's walking with a crowd of people, and he points to me behind my table, and he says, yeah, there's that guy that sold me that snake for all that money that I never made anything off of, and he said it in jest and, whatever, I can laugh about it. And all I could think to myself was, man, that was your fail. That wasn't mine. If anything, mine was a success and yours was a fail. And, I just hope those animals are fine. That's it. It's like when you see somebody that gets let down and, they buy a $50,000 banana and they're only worth $10,000 or something like that, $12,000 when they produce. You see them, if they don't make that $50,000 back inside of 2 weeks,
yep,
they're moving on to bigger, better things. They read about this business in what? Make $1 million in a day magazine? I don't think so. This business it's you get out of it what you put in it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely true, and again, I always say, it's definitely the saying, it's a marathon and not a sprint is definitely the case, and a banana would be a perfect example of that. I mean, let's just say you did buy a banana for $50,000 and they're going for $12,000 now. No, it's not that hard to make your money back and be very profitable at that rate, you know. I mean, I know it seems like, oh my gosh, this thing just went down, you know, and 80% in value, but the truth is that it doesn't take that long to make your money back. And again, if hey, when you're investing $50,000, it's an investment. We understand that, but if you do it right, and like you said, put in the right thing, you're not only going to make your money back, you're going to be profitable. But if you're enjoying the experience, I think that's the thing. When people ask me all the time, what animal would you buy? You know, what would you invest in if you were me? My answer is always the same. What animal do you want to open the cage every day and look at?
That's right. What animal do you like? What animal do you love? If you never sold it for $1 and you spent $1 million on it, what animal would you like to produce where you don't care?
Yep.
About that.
Exactly. And if you work with that caliber, that mindset, you'll always be successful. You always will be successful one way or another, whether it's financially successful or at least successful in having an experience that's going to be awesome. And that's, again, if you take that into account in all your decision making, you're going to do way better in this business than trying to think, how am I going to make $1 million and quit my job? Let that come after you've made the right decisions.
Right. Well, and then there's also those people or whatever that expect to make that money back in one season. One season isn't anything. Let me say, I'll fondly bring us back for a minute to when you bought albino hunter and milk snakes.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me, the first year I produced a few. I made, what did you spend on the first project investment? I mean, was it like $25,000 or so, maybe more than that?
Right about that range, yep.
Right about $25,000 on an albino hunter and milk snake project. In that first year, you might have made $25,000, and you were satisfied. But the next year, the price dropped a little bit, and you made $50,000 or $75,000 because it opened itself up to a wider market, a larger number of people. And the year after that, they went down even more in price, and you made twice that. And every year, I think you told me, for years, maybe 5 or 6 consecutive years, your project of albino hunter and milk snakes made you more money than it did that first year when they were all the money, when they were super expensive.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the thing. Sticking with a project is so important. I mean, I'll tell you, the story I've told people before that I love to share is, albino labyrinth Burmese pythons. I bought 2 pair of double head albino labyrinth Burmese pythons from Mark Bell for $25,000. So they're $12,500 a pair. By time I produced 2 years later, albino labyrinths, not double heads, but albino labyrinths for $350.
Right.
And so that is I think that double heads were selling for like $200 a pair. They went from $25,000 for 2 pair down to like under $500 for 2 pair. And yeah, I could have given up on that and just lost my $25,000, but I continued working the project. Number one, I liked Burmese pythons. I still do. It sucks so bad that I mean, this is the first year I've never bred them. I haven't even put males in with females this year, and it's devastating to me. But regardless, I love the animals. I worked the project, and it took me probably 5 or 6 breeding seasons before I broke into the black. But I did. I eventually got all my money back, and I made some profit.
You saw it through, and you saw it through past an 18-month investment. You didn't say, "Oh, it's 18 months later. Why aren't I rich? Why aren't I making all these snakes, or why aren't I making all this money?" And that goes into the ball python mutation thing pretty heavily. So
yeah, and I think that the thing is that and me and you both know, we've experienced it. We've seen other people that have made an investment, and in 18 months, 10 times their money. And I think that's what kind of drives people to dream of, I want to be that guy. And it can certainly happen. Whatever project it is, you can make huge returns on it. But the truth is, in most businesses, in the real business world, most of the time when you invest in a project, you're happy if you break even after 5 years. That's
right. A 3-year break-even point is considered great, and if you broke even before that, then you're amazing. A buddy of mine just recently told me in the stock market, man, if you're making more than 10% in a few months, you're a great trader. And I'm thinking, wow, that just seems like such a low amount of money when we're making 500% on some of these things. in the long run. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that's the problem, is that we're all a little bit jaded on the potential. But then again, me and you both know that, there's the pinstripe, and albino Honduran story, but then there's the Viper Ball story too,
right,
where,
right.
For every pinstripe that you invest, $30,000 in and make hundreds, if not millions of dollars back on, there's also 5 other projects that you've invested, big money in that never pan out, And
oh man, I bought a spot nose for $25,000 the day after Tracy proved out that Powerball, and my first baby sold for $750.
Yeah.
I still don't know that I made back on spot nose. Still to this very day, I probably still am not to my break-even point. But if I look at that time period, it was spiders and pinstripes and clowns and all those other things that we invested in that really did well.
If it makes you feel any better, I paid $40,000 for my spot nose male. So, as a matter of fact, I bought it from Ian from Outback Reptile, and I had this conversation with him probably 6 months ago. I was on the phone with him, and I told him, I said, well, yeah, remember I gave you $40,000 for a spot nose, and he was like, there is no way you gave me $40,000. And I was like, I guarantee you I gave you $40,000. He goes, you know what? I'm going to call you back in 1 minute. And he calls me back at like a minute later, and he goes, I just looked at my records, and holy crap, you paid me $40,000. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, right. Joke's on us, man. Spot noses, huh? Wow. And they're cool, too. I mean, and that's the thing. They're coming back around. A lot of people are investing in them again. So let's just go on to this question I have for you, because we could go on for days about this stuff.
Yep.
And this is, I think, something that's really important out there for the ball python mutation guys to really hear. These things sometimes cost a ton of money. One snake, $50,000, stuff like that. And the market can fluctuate a lot, and we just kind of briefly touched on it. But we all have to start somewhere in this whole business, and I know people would like to know if you think that this market is still worth investing in. I mean, I know what the answer is going to be, but I think people want to hear it, and this isn't just us all towing our company line to keep our businesses alive. It's us wanting our customers to prosper. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, the ball python market here in the U.S., let's not talk about the international stuff per se, since a lot of people don't have the reach to get out there and do business overseas like we do. Quite yet, but yeah, what do you have to say about it?
Well, I think it's kind of analogous to what you said earlier in the conversation, where as prices come down, it opens a larger market. When you think about ball python demand, it probably hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 10 or 12 or maybe even 15 years since the kind of heyday of when ball pythons went from being junk animals that no one wanted to becoming the king of all snakes. I think that if you looked at a graph, you would see that the demand it may have hockey sticked a little bit in the very beginning, but then it kind of has been just on an upward climb, the steady upward climb. Every year more people get them, more people want them, more people buy them. I think and by the way, I'm always honest with people about the market. I'm not towing the company line. I think where we've seen the change in the market has been the supply side of things. So the demand has just been on this upward steady climb of more people want them, more people are interested, because they are really probably the best snake overall as far as, pet, easy to care for. They don't get big, but they're not too small. They're, placid. They quirk you about eating and stuff like that, but then they have a gazillion paint jobs that you can make all kinds of cool stuff. So anything you want, you can fit in. Now that the prices are down to where you can almost buy any color phase for under $1,000. I mean, as far as, you may not get an exact animal, but if you want a white snake, you can get a white snake. You want a yellow snake, you get a yellow snake. You want a black snake, you get a black snake. I mean, it's kind of like the perfect animal. So I think the demand is going to not only continue to climb, but maybe even accelerate a little bit. Now where the downside is that the supply has also increased tremendously. And I think that's where, an investment gets a little bit scary, is the more people, that have the supply, the quicker the price comes down. Now, that being said, the baseline always is going to come back to kind of the pet trade when I think about all reptiles as a whole, is the pet trade. Let's just take, for instance, Petco, let's just say. They have about 1,500 stores right now with the ambition of adding 500 stores in the next 5 years. So say they're going to level out somewhere about 2,000 stores. Let's say, and I happen to know for a fact, that they are going to put piebalgs in almost every one of those stores, okay?
Sure.
Now, let's say piebalgs right now are wholesale $500, that's $600. Petco may only want to pay $300 to retail them for $600, but they feel that they can sell them for $600. That means if every Petco just puts one ball python in, that's 2,000 piebald ball pythons that are going to have to be sold for the first order. Now, they're going to, some may not sell one in an entire year, or maybe only sell one. Others are going to sell 10 in a year. So just Petco alone could absorb 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 piebald ball pythons. And the same goes with albinos and pastels.
And we're talking right now there's probably not that many piebalds being produced nationwide. Yeah, or very, very close to it if you added up everyone's production, including Pete Call, including Bill Brandt, including you. I mean, that's a lot of ball pythons to make in one paint job.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying is that, and I happen to know right now, Petco is talking about, and we don't know PetSmart, those are going to follow suit too, and that's not to mention the Pet Supplies Pluses and the other chain stores and stuff like that. These stores are going to probably follow suit, but they're going to put pastels, spiders, pinstripes, piebalds, and albinos, at least those 5 mutations in the stores. So that's 5 snakes that are almost going to be impossible to produce the supply just to meet the needs of Petco, let alone if PetSmart starts and these other chains start. Now, you see what I'm saying? Now, all of a sudden, the demand line is way above the supply line on those animals. Well, as more and more animals get into that range that are very interesting looking, like spinner blast and lemon blast and bumblebees and all these other animals, and they can get into the pet trade and sell retail for $500, $600, wholesale for half that, or whatever the case may be, the same demand is going to be put on those animals. And I know as a big producer of animals, it's almost impossible to produce those numbers in that volume year in and year out. And you start
and guarantee it, because they want guarantees. They want you to say, I want you to supply me with this many piebalds. We need these. Yeah. And it's a corporate demand. It's not just a guy saying, "Hey, I think I might buy one."
Right.
But let me just pause you for just a second here and talk about this, because I want people out there to know that it's not something that just is going to be affecting the large producers, because people are going to say, well, how can I get into selling Petco ball pythons? And, they're not really going to be able to. They're going to have to wholesale to whoever Petco has their contract with. But I'd like to say this, and I don't know if you were going to touch on it, but I want to be sure we mention it, that most people going to Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supplies, Plus, whatever, big box retailers, are not informed of the market. They're not informed of reptile shows, and they're not informed of a private breeder and an online marketplace. So what we're going to see is a lot of first-time people entering the hobby with mutation ball pythons because of Petco and PetSmart that are going to do further research and more than likely not buy a second or a third animal from them, but come to our private marketplace where they can buy from the breeder directly. So, I mean, you agree with that, right, that assumption?
I couldn't agree more with it, and I always tell people now, just to preference, I don't supply the big box chain stores. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, Brian's talking about the box chain stores because that's his money. I'm one of the big guys that doesn't supply the big box chains. Yeah, I supply people that.
Yeah, one of the probably the only one of the producers of your caliber and size that doesn't contract animals out to a big box retailer.
It's absolutely true. I think I'm the only guy that's producing the numbers and not having that as a customer. But I'm not opposed to them, because this is what I always say. Take Tinley Park, the NRBC, in October. I'm going to assume that they put up, no one ever tells you the numbers of the people coming through the door, but let's say 10,000. I'd say that's a reasonable number. I don't think they hit 20,000. I don't think they're 5,000. I think they're 10, 8, 10, 12,000 people come through the door. Now, conversely, you think of the Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supplies Plus. Right now, those stores, those 3 big chains right now, probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3,500 to 4,000 stores in the country. That in every day, hundreds of people are going through each one of those stores. You
Right.
start adding up the number, and every day, the people that are exposed to that first piebald, when it gets into those stores, the first time, it's going to be, every day, it's going to be 5 times the number of the biggest show that only happens once a year for the reptile hobby. So the exposure that those stores have, like you said, and let's face it, if someone's going to buy a pied from Petco, they're probably going to then go online and Google pie ball pythons, and they're not going to see Petco. They're going to see Ralph Davis or the Sutherlands or BHB or whoever it might be, and they're going to do research, and then they're going to go on Bush League or ballpythons.net, and they're going to become part of that community, and they're going to order their subscription to Reptiles Magazine, and next thing you know, they're going to be going to those reptile shows. They're going to be ordering from people, and that's what I'm saying. Do I think the future? Yeah, I mean, absolutely, ball pythons are going to get cheaper. Every mutation out there starts at a high and comes down. That is just...
Yeah, these animals don't have an intrinsic value. We can't eat their flesh or use their skins for anything, or their bones or their eggs. They have no intrinsic value. They're worth what we are willing to pay for them as hobbyists and collectors.
Absolutely.
But I mean, that's what it's really important, I think, for us to stress to the listeners of particularly of this show, that the Petco and the PetSmart and stuff like that aren't inherently bad for our industry. A lot of people are going to be like, dude, I went to Petco the other day and I saw an albino for $400. These things are going to be worth dirt. They're going to be normal ball pythons. They're not going to be normal ball pythons because there's a cost involved to each one of us breeders that we all should know. We should figure out how much money we have invested in producing a baby. If, from a business standpoint. From a hobby standpoint, we're interested in producing babies and we don't care what it costs because we love producing them and all that stuff. And I agree with you 100%. Those hatching of those eggs, I'm literally bored in the non-hatching season because I really am jonesing to go in there and just check stuff out, But really to just encourage people that, newcomers in this hobby is what's going to keep the market alive for all of us that are trying to produce and move our babies.
Right.
And I'm glad that we touched on that. I really think that, I'm sure your answer would finally be absolutely yes, this is worth investing in.
Of course. I mean, there's just, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't feel 1,000% behind the validity of an investment down the road too. I'd still be keeping reptiles. I'd be keeping them as a hobby. I've told this to millions of people that I would keep reptiles if it cost me money and I never made a dime. But I wouldn't be doing that while I'm doing it now. And I'm steadfast. I'm bullish on the future of the market. I think that prices are going to come down, but then the next animal will come in to replace it. And there are always going to be, great investments, and there's always going to be investments that are getting softer. But there's as the investment gets softer, the demand goes up. The price comes down, the demand goes up. Bananas are going to sell really well at $1,000.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And that's what you have to realize is that I can make lots of money if I was selling for $50,000 a piece, and if I sold 10 of them, I made $500,000. But you're going to literally sell 10 or 12 or 15, and that's going to be your max. There ain't that many people out there with $50,000 to drop on a snake. There's a lot of people out there, thousands and tens of thousands of people that will drop $500 to $1,000 on a really beautiful snake. And you just got to keep that in mind. And it's this isn't going away. I mean, the only way this all goes away is if for some reason some legislation passes. But I don't think that's going to happen in the near future with all the advocacy groups that we have, going for us. So
yeah, and let's plug that for a second. People out there listening to this, join your local herp society, join organizations like USARC or PJAC, the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council. Any other places you'd like to plug real quick for that, Brian, or that's pretty much it? Or?
Well, I'm obviously a big PJAC and USARC supporter. I think that they're our best bets. But I think that putting your energy and your faith behind whoever is fighting for our rights is the way to go. I just think that we need to make sure that we're all members of PJAC and that we're all members of USARC. And then if you want to back anybody or anything that's willing to fight for rights, then I'd say go ahead and back them. And I think it does start in the grassroots, which is the herp societies. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, herp societies, local legislations, governors, senators, state representatives, all of those people are going to be crucial to educate them, not only on the fact that the animals aren't very harmful, but, educate them on the fact that there is a market here, that this isn't a cottage, cutesy little crafty industry. Last week on Tim's show, I stressed and Tim stressed the importance of organizing your business. If you are going to reptile shows and making a significant amount of money with your business, form an LLC, form yourself a sole proprietorship. A lot of accountants will, you can take a few minutes and maybe most of them will probably do it for free, but you can probably pay an accountant a few dollars to advise you on what you should do with your business, your tax presence, things like that. Because that's what's going to make this a serious business for a lot of us.
Right.
Exotics by Nature, we formed a corporation immediately, because we also had a retail store too, so we had a lot more paperwork involved. But even, I set up an LLC for another business that I have not long ago. It's unrelated to reptiles, but I think it cost me $75 to set up an LLC, and it was completely free to get a tax ID number or so. It doesn't cost much. And then my accountant said, for me to file these extra business returns, it's probably only like $150 a year to file the returns, through my accountant, on my other personal returns. So the importance, again, is being considered a serious business. This isn't just, your aunt and your grandmother going to the local craft fair to sell the necklaces they've been making. This isn't like that. This is something serious. There's people out there that aren't established businesses that are probably, selling $50,000 worth of snakes a year, and it's just, organize yourself and organize with your friends.
Yeah, bottom line is that, we do need to be considered a tax base. Obviously I have 10 people that rely on me to pay their bills. They are work for me, and they get a weekly check, and they don't pay their house payments if I don't pay them. And when the government starts to see you as legitimate business, it changes a lot of perception. And that's really ultimately what although it was terrible what happened with the rule change with the Lacey Act, with Burmese pythons and 4 other animals, the truth is that's what saved reticulated pythons and boa constrictors was the tax base. It was the economic impact, and we have to all remember that, very much so, definitely, 100%.
Yeah, because we could sit a council of teachers and children in front of a group of legislators and say, these kids like these snakes for educational purposes, they're learning, they're appreciating nature and all this stuff, and if one guy goes up there and says, hey, we make $10 million a year.
Right.
They're going to listen to that guy before they're going to listen to a group of teachers and children, when they should listen to everyone. But the thing is, bottom line is, the government and the legislation seem to care about the fiscal ramifications of their actions.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen if we're not organized and that tax base isn't covered. So, well, that was cool. That's a good topic. I again could go on with you for hours probably.
Yeah, again, we could do 5 of these shows together
on that one thing. Yeah, for sure. So you work with other species, not just ball pythons. Hopefully our ball python listeners don't click mute for this segment, but diversity in your collection. I went from having probably 50, 60 species of reptile in our facility breeding to maybe only having 10. And I'd like to get back up a little bit on that. But what is your view on the diversity of people, advantage or disadvantage these days? And I don't mean for you, because obviously you have a fairly diverse collection, but I mean for a lot of these people out there that want to continue to do this.
Well, I think that if you're looking at it from a purely business standpoint, if you're looking at it, beyond the hobbyist, because it's hobbyist, I think we all want to keep turtles and tortoises and, whatever else it might be. If you're looking at it from a complete business standpoint, I think you protect yourself through diversity. Ball pythons I think, people ask me this all the time, what's next? What's the next thing beyond ball pythons? And I always keep saying, I don't know that there is a next beyond ball pythons. I think ball pythons may reign supreme. I wrote an article for Scales and Tails magazine about this very topic. Are ball pythons really the royalty of the snake world? And of course, the pun on the Royal Python thing. And I believe that they will be for many, many years to come. Will they stay there forever? I don't know. I mean, I look at, and I've worked with a ton of different species of animals, and what I haven't worked with personally, I've been around, and I don't see an animal that takes their spot. You know what I mean? I really don't. I don't see an animal that has all of the desirability of ball pythons that can take over as the next investment that everyone. I remember when people, it was kind of crazy that Burmese pythons used to be ball pythons in the world, in the reptile world. Everyone had Burmese pythons because that's where the money was, that's where the interest was.
Yeah, they're just flat out impractical.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I can't believe that Don Hamper used to have a basement full of Burmese pythons. It doesn't even make sense to me, but he did, and so then people got rid of those and got into leopard geckos and this and that. And so there's always a changing of the guard, so to speak, but I don't see the next project. At least I can't visualize it. If I thought maybe it'd be ball or carpet pythons. There's a lot of carpet python people. They're amazing animals, but they're still a niche animal. I thought it might be blood pythons, still a niche animal.
Yeah,
those projects aren't incredible. They are incredible, but they're still going to always be niche. What can take that next level? I don't know. But that being said, I do believe in diversity. I think that you hedge your bet between a number of animals that you work with, and I can tell you this from a guy that does trade shows a lot. I can go to a trade show and always have an okay show because I have corn snakes, king snakes, milk snakes, rainbow boas, carpet pythons, sand boas, you name now bearded dragons and leopard geckos. Because you're always going to hit something, and I'll be honest, I did a show a couple weeks, maybe a month ago or so, that I didn't sell one ball python, not one, in the entire show. And there was a period of time where, 90% of my sales was ball pythons. And not one person bought a ball python from me. But I was able to have an okay show. It wasn't a great show because, again, when you sell a ball python for $1,000 or $2,000, it's going to be a lot better show than if you sell 10 corn snakes for $25. But I had an okay show. I covered my expenses. I made it worth my while to go to the show, and it was all on corn snakes, king snakes, and rainbow boas.
Right, and by no means does that mean the ball python market is dead. It only means that particular show, maybe that area was saturated. Maybe people just flat out had an interest in other things that day. It's or they flat out didn't have the money this time because of the economy and whatnot.
Yeah, I'll still sell 10 ball pythons to every other snake. I mean, don't get me wrong. Ball pythons are still the most popular snake in the trade, no doubt about it. I always laugh with our web show. People will complain when I have too much ball pythons. But yet, you know what? Whether it's my web show, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, the analytics, the data doesn't lie. I do a show on ball pythons. It's the most popular show. I do Instagram with a ball python. I mean, again, I've looked at this very close. I'll do an Instagram on a boa constrictor and then do an Instagram on a ball python. I get twice the likes on the ball python. So ball pythons are still the king, and they will be probably for a long time. The market's great. Like you said, this particular show, for whatever reason, whether they didn't have the money, whether I didn't have exactly what they wanted, who knows what the answer was. But for some reason, I didn't sell a ball python at the show, but yet I was able to salvage my show because I had other diversity. I think it's a good thing, and I will say that my perception is starting to be that more people are wanting to get more diverse again, whereas there was definitely a shrinking of the diversity in the market over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And quite frankly, some people like it, some people don't like it. Again, I told you I'll always be honest. I don't like the fact that you go to Tinley Park now and 90% of the tables are ball pythons.
No crap, man. I'm right there with you. It's funny, we talked about earlier, going back in the day with the show when I was young and I met you, we were talking about, this was a completely different marketplace. I mean, when if I wanted to see albino balls or piebald ball pythons, there was 2 tables at the show in Orlando. I went to Bob Clark's table to look at albino ball pythons, and I went to Pete Call's table to look at piebalds. And there was nothing much else than that. Here and there, some normals, again, the garbage animal of the industry. Coming around to, that was probably 1993, 94, 95, and then coming around to 98, 99, I started getting interested in the mutations. Didn't quite have the money to invest. But I can remember the first year that the show was in Daytona, it was 2000, and I had to search for people that had ball pythons. I mean, I had to really look beyond BHB, beyond Graziani,
Yep.
Bob Clark and Pete Call, and everybody else had God knows what else. You know, I mean, tortoises and all kinds of lizards, frogs. You know, what was the popular snake then? Nothing was the popular snake then. Everything was popular then. You know, and now you go to a show. I mean, let's just talk about Daytona, because it was the most diverse, I think, show in the country, just because people in Florida have warm weather and they can have a lot more stuff, iguanas and tortoises and, you know, all these outside animals, tegus and whatnot, that up in the north you don't really see as many breeders of. That show was packed with diversity. There was everything there. You could make a shopping list out of the classifieds in the back of Reptiles magazine, or a Vivarium magazine or something like that, Reptile and Amphibian magazine, all these magazines that, you know, remember the old adage, please send me a self-addressed stamped envelope for a price list. You know,
yeah, exactly.
The days prior to the Internet, Brian. I mean, this is crazy that I can sit here and talk to you about this stuff and we can reminisce on these particular things. But you know,
I think,
there's just not that diversity.
No, and I think that I always say markets overreact in both ways. You know, they overreact in too high a prices, they overact in too low a prices, and something's always in between. And I think what's happening now is that there's too much or not enough diversity, and now they'll go the other way eventually. You know, I mean, it's in that process. I'm dealing with a lot of ball python people that are buying their first other snakes, whether it be carpet pythons, rainbow boas, or colubrids. You know, they're getting back into it. They're going to still work with ball pythons because they still love ball pythons, but now they just decide, you know, I want to get into this other thing. And I think you're going to start to see these shows become a little more diverse again. And it's always what the market dictates. You know, I mean, again, I know people that go to shows that have diversity, and they typically always do relatively well. You know, again, you might do better, might do worse. I know people that go to ball python shows. I mean, there's one individual, we won't mention his name, but, you know, he did Daytona, and he killed it. I mean, killed it. You know, definitely did better than anyone else. And then, you know, he did Tinley, and he had a really poor show because he just had one thing represented, and that was ball pythons. That's all he had. And unfortunately, the Tinley show in October, although an amazing show and really a great time, there wasn't the ball python buyers that normally are at that show.
And there was a lot of people there. I didn't make it just because of my injury. I wasn't able to go this year. And sadly enough, I missed Daytona. Real quick, I'll say that. You know, after my injury, I missed Daytona, and that is the first Daytona show that I've missed in 18 years, the first Wayne Hill show. I've been to every one since I met you, and I've never, ever missed it. And this year I missed it because I was sitting in the hospital bed, and it really sucked. Yeah. But, you know, I heard that, man, the diversity is just not there anymore, and, you know, it was all a ball python show, and ball python, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, just on Facebook a couple days ago, I saw, I think it was, what's his name, Ralph, M.A. Balls or something like that. He posted a lot. He posted something. What's his name?
Raffi, yeah.
Raffi. Okay, I'm sorry. My apologies, Raffi. You know, that he posted something like, do you think that these shows should limit the number of ball python breeders that are allowed to encourage more diversity, you know? Now, we don't want to encourage diversity in the way of imports and wild-caught things and things that are funky, because we don't want that stuff at shows. But really quickly, because we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you one more question. What do you think about that? Do you think that somebody should limit, you know, a show promoter should limit? And this isn't no naming. I'm not talking specifically NARBC or NRBE or any of the other, you know, abbreviated reptile shows out there. But what do you think?
You know, I don't think so. You know, I've talked to. It's funny. I think that I'm a guy that's about free market. The market will take care of itself. If the ball python diversity isn't, if the diversity in reptiles isn't enough and ball pythons are becoming too prevalent at shows, people won't spend as much money on them, or vendors won't make as much money, and they will stop going to the show, and other people will take their spot. You know, I mean, that's, you know, the market will work itself out. I'm really a big proponent of that. That being said, I remember bringing up something to Brian Potter in Arlington this August. And I said, you know, guys, you know, it's the NRBC, you know, what do you think about, you know, doing a diverse show where you guys basically say, we're going to have 100 tables or 200, whatever it is, there's going to be 10 ball python tables, there's going to be 10 boa tables, there's going to be 10 this, and I just thought, I say not like picking the breeders, not like, okay, I'm going to have BHB and I'm going to have, just say, listen, there's 10 ball python people available, the first 10 get that, and then there's 10 boa tables and the 10 people get that. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have that diverse show? And I hadn't thought about it until his response was, 90% of the people coming through the door want to see ball pythons. If we give them a show that doesn't have a full of ball pythons, we're going to have less people through the door. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. And that goes back to my initial statement that says the free market will take care of itself. We'll see the diversity coming because of the lack of funding that's going to get into that market, and it'll take care of itself over time. So I'm a person that doesn't believe in any regulation when it comes to that whatsoever. I think it's
okay. Well, I didn't really mean to put you on a spot about it or anything like that either. It's one of those things where it can kind of be a touchy subject when you really get into it because, there's going to be favoritism. Let's face it. It's not a computer that's going to randomly pick what ball python people are there. There's going to be, well, even if there's not favoritism, there's going to be the suspicion of favoritism from those competing breeders, and, having a marketplace that's limited like that, I can agree with you. Let the market work itself out. Sadly enough, for all of us, out there that have been bringing mostly ball pythons to a show like that has probably diluted the amount of money that we can make just because there's so many other competitors and options out there. But it's a free market society, and we need to keep it that way. So I guess I have one last question for you that I'd really like to ask if we have time. If not, then I guess it can get edited out. Specific people in the reptile business that you would like to thank or have influenced you. You mentioned Mark Bell. I want to just say this really quick, too. Something you shared with me when I first got started was, I believe when you told me that Bill Brandt mentioned this to you. And I'm not sure if you still, use this saying, but every dollar spent in this marketplace is a dollar towards every one of us. It's not, if someone goes to Brian and spends $100,000 on the same snakes that I had for sale, I'm not pissed off about the fact that happened because Brian's money kind of stays in the industry. He's still got to buy that next hot thing. He's still got to, feed his snakes rodents, and a lot of our rodent dealers and stuff have collections of snakes as well. He's still got to buy caging and things like that help out other people. So, it's always been something that I've said to people, much like what you said, do what you love, and you'll never have to work it out. Work it hard. But remember that the money spent in this business is spent towards all of us, and it's not like a lot of other businesses in that respect,
Right.
So who influenced you? These people obviously we're talking about.
I think that I always say I'd love to eventually, make homage to some of the old timers in the business that really were my posters, up in the thing. Certainly Mark and Kim Bell were a huge influence on me when I was first starting out because they were local, and I saw him be such an innovator. He was the first guy to take it to the level that people didn't even think of taking it. Now there's some big collections across the country. But I saw Mark raise up 150 female Burmese pythons, when that was unconscionable. People did, what are you thinking, 150 female ball?
Yeah, you almost have to have a rabbit farm to do that.
Yeah, it was just unbelievable. I've seen Mark, and so that he was always an inspiration, and he was always there. So obviously that's one. But there's a lot of guys that it's a bothering, It's bothering to me that people don't even know who Ernie Wagner is. Hardly know who Tom Widener is. Tom Lamont. The list goes. Even Gary Sipperly. Sipperly was a huge name in our business.
Right. Just to backtrack 2 seconds, just for everybody who loves ball pythons, Ernie Wagner actually bought the very first piebald ball python, and he bred it, and then he, eventually sold it to Pete Call. So a lot of people that are like, oh man, Pete Call, and piebald ball pythons, not to take anything away from Pete because he's a super innovator as well. But Ernie Wagner was the guy. If you can dig up Old Reptiles magazine with a picture of a piebald, it said Wagner. It said E. Wagner on the photo credit.
Yep. And these are the guys that were, doing this number one way before there was money. I mean, there was no money. As a matter of fact, these guys, I was sitting around with the Ernie Wagners and the Tom Wideners and even the Tom Crutchfields and these guys, you know, down in Joe Terry and, you know, these guys. I love sitting around talking to these guys, them telling me stories back in the 60s when you know, when you did produce, which wasn't very often. You tried, but, you know, no one knew what temperature to incubate these things at, or what vermiculite or perlite to use, what the ratio of water to weight is. And, you know, when you did have some success, you know, you didn't really sell them. You just traded them for the next thing that you worked with. And that was when there was a lot of purity into working. I mean, you were working on purely for the love and not for the money whatsoever. And I love those stories, and those are my poster childs. You know, I mean, I look at those people, and I have such admiration for the road that they paved for all of us, you know, and that's one of the things, Sean, that I kind of just keep on thinking is that I hope that when I'm done with this crazy journey that I've been on for the last 25 years, and hopefully will be for another 25 years, I just hope that people will look back and go, you know, Brian was one of the guys that helped pave the way for the next generation of people to take over. And you know, again, I'm still young in my eyes, so I've got a long way to go. So don't write me off yet and retire me. But I'm just saying, I hope that someday people will look at me the same way that I look at that older generation and say, my gosh, you know, these guys really made things so that we can go forward. And then lastly, you know, even though those guys are the guys I'd, like I said, put up on my wall as posters, the truth is that there's you know, I'm inspired by so many people. I'm inspired by the basement breeders. I'm inspired by the guy that produces stuff for the very first time. I mean, everywhere I look is inspiration in the reptile business. It really is. And you know as well as I do, Sean, that these new upcomers, you know, they keep us on our feet, you know, because they're innovative. They're fast. They're quick.
Right.
They do things that are if we don't keep on our game, they'll pass us up.
Man,
so that's
you're not kidding.
Itself.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I mean, I went from being 14, I'm now 33. I'm not going to call you an old man, but you know what? You keep us on our toes, too. You know, all of this social networking stuff that you do through Snake Bites and Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff, man. I mean, you know, I got friends that don't even have Facebook pages yet, and I'm telling them, man, you're missing the boat. This Facebook thing for reptiles is just blown up. Everybody has a classifieds. Everybody has an auction. Everybody has a business page that can be liked or whatever, you know. But, I mean, I'm certainly not writing you off. You've done a hell of a job, doing that.
I've got a lot left in the tank, and I just, you know, I mean, I've got lots of ideas and lots of things, so I'll be around for a while. But again, you know, these guys are keeping the heat to my feet. You know, they're making me keep on pushing it, man. I love it though. But it's great. So, like I said, they inspire me to keep pushing. You know, I was around before the internet, and yet I embraced the internet more than probably anyone in this business. And
this business was completely changed by the internet. I mean, it's. Everything was completely changed by the internet. Our daily life. I mean, hell, I sit in a wheelchair and click the buy button on Amazon.com like crazy. Stuff shows up right to the door. I mean, I could get in the car, you know, with Rachel and go off to the store and buy it. But flat out, man, it's just it's easier for me. You know, I can go online and read 500 ratings on a product to find out if I want to buy it or not, instead of going to the store and spending my hard-earned money and deciding, shit, I shouldn't have bought this. This thing's a piece of crap. You know, and that's something that the reptile business has embraced, too. Forums like, you know, Fauna Classifieds with its Board of Inquiry, the BOI, you know, where you can basically sound off your positives, which is pretty rare, and negatives about breeders that you've dealt with, you know, and stuff like that keeps us going, keeps us active, keeps us clean, you know. So.
It really is, yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. It's been a great show. We're out of time. Like I said, we can go on for days. But, you know, I just want to tell everybody out there that, you know, Brian has just been such an inspiration to a lot of us. I mean, a lot of you have listened to Snake Bites and watched what he and his crew have to say, and they've been inspirational to you through that medium. But I want you to know that, you know, he's been an inspiration to me back through, you know, again, the days of self-addressed stamped envelope priceless requests, you know. I have a folder in my desk right here that is called Ancient Price Lists, and it's got quite a few of your old lists in it, Brian, from the 90s, and even some from the 80s from people that are long gone from the business. But, as it changes, we're going to change with it, and that's why I wanted to have these 3 shows. So please, everybody out there, thank Brian as much as you can. Thank Tim Bailey. Thank Jason Rossi, who runs this whole Her Purpure radio show, for being able to bring you stuff like this. And please don't forget to tune in to our last part of the 3-part series where we're going to answer some questions about collections and breeding and business practices. And so get me those questions, please. Thanks for listening to Her Purpure. Brian, thank you so much. It was been, a really good time, I think.
Yeah, it was great for me. Thank you for having me on, and you know that I'm always there for you all the time, and you've been a great friend for a couple decades, and I'm looking forward to the next couple decades of friendship.
Yeah, that's great, man. So, everybody, again, thanks for listening to Her Purpure. This is Sean Bradley, and we're signing out. Hi, this is Sean Bradley, coming to you guys through Her Purpure podcast. I hope you guys enjoy everything that we talk about here.